Rígsþula, the Lay of Rig. The Rígsþula is found in neither of the principal codices. The only manuscript containing it is the so-called Codex Wormanius, a manuscript of Snorri's Prose Edda. The poem appears on the last sheet of the manuscript, which unluckily is incomplete, and thus the end of the poem is lacking. In the Codex Wormanius itself, the poem has no title, but a fragmentary parchment included with it calls the poem Rígsþula. Some late paper manuscripts give it the title of Rigsmál. The Rígsþula is essentially unlike anything else which editors have agreed to include in the so-called Edda. It is a definitively cultural poem, explaining, on a mythological basis, the origin of the different castes of early society: the thralls, the peasants, and the warriors. From the warriors finally springs one who is destined to become a king, and thus the whole poem is a song in praise of the royal estate. This fact in itself would suffice to indicate that the Rígsþula was not composed in Iceland, where for centuries kings were regarded with profound disapproval. Not only does the Rígsþula praise royalty, but it has many of the earmarks of a poem composed in praise of a particular king. The manuscript breaks off at a most exasperating point, just as the connection between the mythological young Kon, Konungur, king, and the monarch in question is about to be established. Owing to the character of the Norse settlements in Iceland, Ireland, and the Western Islands generally, search for a specific king leads back to either Norway or Denmark. Despite the arguments advanced by Edzardi, Vigfusson, Powell, and others, it seems most improbable that such a poem would have been produced elsewhere than on the continent, the region where Scandinavian royalty most flourished. Finnur Jonsson's claim for Norway, with Harold the Fair-Haired as the probable king in question, is much less impressive than Munch's ingenious demonstration that the poem was in all probability composed in Denmark in honor of either Gorm the Old or Harald Bluetooth. His proof is based chiefly on the evidence provided by stanza 49 and is summarized in the note to that stanza. Note 49. Don and Don. These names are largely responsible for the theory that Rígsþula was composed in Denmark. According to the Latin epitome of the Skjoldesunga by Arngrimr Jonsson, Regus, was a man not the least among the great ones of his time. He married the daughter of a certain Domp, Lord of Dompsted, whose name was Donna, and later, having won the royal title for his province, left as his heir his son by Donna, called Don or Donum, all of whose subjects were called Danes. This may or may not be conclusive, and it is great pity that the manuscript breaks off abruptly at this stanza. The poet, however, was certainly not a Dane, but probably a wandering Norse singer, who may or have had a dozen homes, and who clearly had spent much time in some part of the Western Island world, chiefly inhabited by Celts. The extent of Celtic influence on the Eddic poems in general is a matter of sharp dispute. Powell, for example, claims almost all the poem for the Western Isles, and attributes nearly all their good qualities to Celtic influence. Without here attempting to enter into the details of the argument, it may be said that the weight of authoritative opinion, which clearly recognizes the marks of Celtic influence in the poems, is against this view. Contact between the roving Norsemen of Norway and Iceland and the Celts of Ireland and the Western Isles, particularly the Orkneys, was so extensive as to make the presumption of an actual Celtic home for the poems seem quite unnecessary. In the case of the Rígsþula, the poem unquestionably had not only picked up bits of the Celtic speech, the name Rig itself is almost certainly of Celtic origin, and there are various other Celtic words employed, but also had caught something of the Celtic literary spirit. This explains the cultural nature of the poem, quite foreign to Norse poetry in general. On the other hand, the style as a whole is vigorously Norse, and thus the explanation that the poem was composed by an itinerant Norse poet who had lived for some time in the Celtic Isles and who was on a visit to the court of the Danish king, fits the ascertainable facts exceedingly well. As Christianity was introduced into Denmark around 960, the Rígsþula is not likely to compose much after that date, and probably belongs to the first half of the 10th century. Gorm the Old died about the year 935 and was succeeded by Harold Bluetooth, who died about 985. The 14th or late 13th century annotator identifies Rig with Heimdall, but there is nothing in the poem itself and very little anywhere else to warrant this. And it seems likely that the poet had Odin and not Heimdall in mind, his purpose being to trace the origin of the royal estate to the chief of the gods. The evidence bearing on this identification is briefly summed up in the note on an introductory prose passage, but the question involves complex and baffling problems of mythology, and from very early times the status of Heimdall was unquestionably confusing to the Norse mind. Note: it would be interesting to know how much the annotator meant by the phrase old stories. Was he familiar with the tradition in forms other than that of the poem? And if so, his introductory note was scanty, for outside of identifying Rig as Heimdall, he provides no information not found in the poem. Probably he meant simply to refer to the poem itself as a relic of antiquity, and the identification of Rig as Heimdall may well have been an attempt at constructive criticism of his own. The note was presumably written somewhere about 1300 or even later, and there's no reason for crediting the annotator with any considerable knowledge of mythology. There is little to favor the identification of Rig with Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, beyond a few rather vague passages in the other poems. Thus, in Völuspá, stanza 1, the Volva asks, hearing, "From Heimdall's sons, both high and low." In Grimnismál, stanza 13, there is a very doubtful line which may mean that Heimdall o'er men holds sway, it is said, and in the short Völuspá, Hinduljóð, stanza 40, he is called the kinsman of men. On the other hand, everything in the Rígsþula, including the phrase "the aged and wise" in stanza 1, and the references to runes in stanzas 36, 44, and 46, fits Odin exceedingly well. It seems probable that the annotator was wrong and that Rig is Odin, and not Heimdall. Rig almost certainly based on the Old Irish word for king, Rí or Rig. Rígsþula. Men say there went by the ways so green of old the gods, the aged and wise, mighty and strong did Rig go striding. Forward he went on the midmost way, he came to a dwelling, a door on its posts. In did he fare, on the floor was a fire, two hoary ones by the hearth there sat, Ai and Edda in olden dress. Rig knew well wise words to speak. Soon in the midst of the room he sat, and on either side the others were. A loaf of bread did Edda bring, heavy and thick and swollen with husks. Forth on the table she set the fare, and broth for the meal in a bowl there was. Calf's flesh boiled was the best of the dainties. Rig knew well wise words to speak, thence did he rise, made ready to sleep. Soon in the bed himself did he lay, and on either side the others were. Thus was he there for 3 long nights, then forward he went on the midmost way, and so 9 months were soon passed by. A son bore Edda, with water they sprinkled him, with his cloth in his hair, so black they covered. Thrall they named him. His skin was wrinkled and rough on his hands, knotted his knuckles, thick his fingers, and ugly his face, twisted his back and big his heels. He grew to grow and to gain in strength, soon of his might good use he made, with bast he bound and burdens carried, home bore faggots the day whole long. One came to their home, crooked her legs, stained with her feet, and sunburned her arms. Flat was her nose, her name was Thrall. Soon in the midst of the room she sat, by her side there sat the son of the house. They whispered both, and the bed made ready, Thrall and Thrall, till the day was through. Children they had, they lived and were happy, Fjosnir and Klur they were called, methinks, Thraim and Cleggy, Kefsir, Fonir, Drum, Degraldi, Drot, and Legaldi, Lut and Hosvir, the house they cared for, ground they dunged and swine they guarded, goats they tended and turf they dug. Daughters had they, Drumba and Kumba, Okvin Kalfa, Arin Nefla, Isan Ambat, Aiken Tjansla, Totru Gipya, and Tronu Bena, and thence had risen the race of thralls. Forward went Rig, his road was straight, to the hall he came, and a door there hung. In did he fare, on the floor was a fire, Afi and Amma owned the house. There sat the twain, and worked at their tasks, the man hewed wood for the weaver's beam. His beard was trimmed, o'er his brow a curl, his clothes fitted close in the corner of a chest. The woman sat, and the distaff wielded, at the weaving with arms outstretched she worked. On her head was a band, on her breast a smock, on her shoulders a kerchief, with clasps there were. Rig knew well wise words to speak, soon in the midst of the room he sat, on either side the others were. Then Amma took the vessels full with the fare she set, calf's flesh boiled was the best of the dainties. Rig knew well wise words to say, he rose from the board, made ready to sleep. Soon in the bed himself did he lay, and on either side the others were. Thus was he there for 3 nights long, then forward he went on the midmost way, and so 9 months were soon passed by. A son bore Amma, with water they sprinkled him, Karl they named him, in a cloth she wrapped him, he was ruddy of face and flashing his eyes. He began to grow and to gain in strength, oxen he rode and plows made ready, houses he built and barns he fashioned, carts he made and the plow he managed. Home did they bring the bride for Karl, in goatskins clad and keys she bore. Snurr was her name, beneath the veil she sat. A home they made ready and rings exchanged, the bed they decked and a dwelling made. Sons they had, they lived and were happy, Hal and Dring, Holt, Thane and Smith, Braith and Bondi, Bundeskeggi, Boy and Body, Bratskeg and Seg. Daughters they had, and their names are here, Snot and Bruth, Svani, Svarli, Spraki, Fliot, Sprund and Vith, Fema, Ristil, and thence has risen the yeoman's race. Thence went Rig, his road was straight, a hall he saw, the doors faced south, the portal stood wide, on the posts was a ring, then in he fared, the floor was strewn. Within 2 gazed in each other's eyes, Fadir and Mudir, and played with their fingers. There sat the house lord, wound strings for the bow, shafts he fashioned, and bows he shaped. The lady sat, and her arms she looked, she smoothed the cloth and fitted the sleeves. Gay was her cap, on her breast were clasps, broad was her train, of blue was her gown. Her brows were bright, her breast was shining, whiter her neck than new fallen snow. Rig knew well wise words to speak, Soon in the midst of the room he sat, on either side the others were. Then mother brought a broidered cloth of linen bright, and the board she covered. And then she took the loaves so thin, and laid them white from the wheat on the cloth. Then forth she brought the vessels full, with silver covered, and set before them meat all browned and well-cooked birds. In the pitcher was wine, of plate were the cups. So drank they and talked till the day was gone. Rig knew well wise words to speak. Soon did he rise, made ready to sleep. So in the bed himself did he lay, and on either side the others were. Thus was he there for 3 long nights, then forward he went on the midmost way, and so 9 months were soon passed by. A son had mother, with silk they wrapped him, with water they sprinkled him, Jarl he was. Blond was his hair, and bright was his cheeks, grim as a snake's was his glowing eyes. To grow in the house did Jarl begin. Shields he brandished and bowstrings wound, bows he shot and shafts he fashioned, arrows loosened and lances wielded, horses he rode and hounds unleashed, swords he handled and sounds he swam. Straight from the grove came striding Rig came striding, and runes he taught them. By his name he called him, as son he claimed him, and bade him bold, his heritage wide, the ancient homes. Forward he rode, through the forest dark, o'er the crusty crags, till the hall he found. His spear he shook, his shield he brandished, his horse he spurred, and with the sword he hewed. Wars he raised, and red in the fields, warriors slew he, and land he won. 18 halls ere long did he hold, wealth did he get and gave to all, stones and jewels and slim-flanked steeds, rings he offered and arm rings shared. His messengers went by the ways so wet, and came to the hall where Hersir dwelt. His daughter was fair and slender-fingered, Erna the wise the maiden was. Her hand they sought, and home they brought her, wedded to Jarl the veil she wore. Together they dwelt, their joy was great, children they had, and happy they lived. Burr was the oldest, and Barn the next, Yoth and Othel, Arthi, Mog, Nith and Svein. Soon they began, Son and Nithjong, to play and swim. Kund was one, the youngest Kon. Soon grew up the sons of Jarl, beasts they tamed and bucklers rounded, shafts they fashioned and spears they shook. But Con the young learned runes to use, the runes everlasting, the runes of life. Soon could he well the warrior's shield, dull the sword blade, and still the seas. Bird chatter learned he, flames could he lessen, minds could he quiet, and sorrows calm. The might and strength of twice 4 men. With Rig Jarl soon the runes he shared, more crafty he was, and greater his wisdom. The right he sought, and soon he won it, Rig to be called, and runes to know. Young Con rode forth through forest and grove, shafts he let loose, and birds he lured. There spake a crow on a bough that sat, Why lurest thou, Con, the birds to come? 'Twere better forth on thy steed to fare, and the host to slay. The halls of Dawn and Domp are noble, greater their wealth than thou best gained. Good are they at guiding the kill, trying of weapons and giving of wounds.